Thank you, Megan. God, this is the first time I've stood at a podium here, I think. I usually do that Spalding Gray thing. So if my knees get weak, you'll understand. I guess I can clutch the side of the podium. This is my first time giving a lecture here, so I've got a coffee, the water. I didn't bring my toddler, sadly, to break the ice. I know. She said, she was having a tough morning, I think, with all the traveling. She said, I don't want to go to a flecture. So she's not at the flecture. So I think this will work out to about 45 minutes or so. We'll see. Just play the music, play me off with music if I go over. I'm calling this lecture of time in the theater. Do I lecture or confess? I'm not Catholic, but my father was. I am mostly Irish, after all, genetically speaking. Will this be a waste of your time? I begin writing this like I begin writing everything lately by asking, what's this? And not so much asking as writing to find out. And once I've found out, I'm finished. As with good plays, so with craft talks, less is probably better, or no prologue at all if you can stand it. Modern life seems to demand it, so if I may be so bold, Part 1, now. I often tell students, perhaps too often, a play is a story that happens. We playwrights don't have the privilege of narration, of hindsight beyond hauntings, of foresight beyond premonition. It's here, this moment, this accretion of moments on stage, before it's gone. One night and one night only, limited engagements, good reviews, but the butts aren't filling seats, good show, but the critics, or critic, as is usually and depressingly the case, aren't down with it. Even Hamilton must close one day. Shakespeare will be nobody, and everybody again. I prefer moments because rarely do we recall words. Shakespeare sometimes accepted. No matter how lyrically or pithily or wittily they've been uttered, we delight in, hold on to, and sometimes carry with us these moments that moved us out of ourselves and into the present moment. Often a stage moment made manifest in language, yes, but not always an epiphany of desire, a failed kiss, farewells, reunions, moments of change, almost always. We write behavior foremost. Language is necessary, but heartbreakingly ethereal, that is, mortal. I say this as a playwright who writes poems and plays in blank verse. Many years ago, though not so many years, I sat in this room where you're sitting now and I listened to a writer speak. I considered him old. I was not yet 30. This was my first summer teaching at Sewanee. The writer was Barry Hannah, and he was somewhere in his 60s. An age far, far over my horizon. He was meant to deliver a craft lecture like this. As far as I can remember, he spoke mostly of his recent treatment for colon cancer. I can see him vividly still, certain moments, the way he sat sidelong in his chair in a toppled column of sunlight, describing how one morning he woke from a dream, a vision, really, of Jesus at the foot of his hospital bed. I'm sure some people here remember this talk too. I can't quote a word from that lecture. What I remember was how that day, those moments shook me deeply, made me feel embarrassed. For what? For him? Me? I was awake. I was scared. I wondered, is this a craft lecture? Now I know it was. About 18 months ago, 6 months after my wife had been diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer with metastasis to the liver. Luckily, I want to say miraculously, the metastasis consisted only of 2 small lesions located in a resectable portion of my liver. I was given a decent chance for a cure. They actually used those words, decent and cure, though medically speaking, one is not cured until 10 years have passed without recurrence. So I've got about 7 months so far. We'll see. Keep your fingers crossed. My liver surgeon told me that 5 years ago I would have been given 6 months to live. First, they removed about 7 inches of my descending colon and somehow stitched me back together without the need for a colostomy bag. They took about 10% of my bladder for safe measure. Then I received 4 months of intense chemotherapy. They, quote, hit me with everything, was how my oncologist likes to put it, because I am relatively young and he felt I could take it. Then my liver was resected, about 15% of it cut out. As the chemotherapy had shrunk those 2 lesions considerably, even reducing the smaller tumor to just a smudge of scar tissue, they nipped out my gallbladder, again, just to be safe. Then 2 more months of chemo. My treatment, as had been promised, was over by Christmas. According to recent scans and blood tests, I have no evidence of disease or NED, a term I prefer to the now apparently out of vogue remission, which to my mind implies a mere respite from the disease anyway. Chris Shin is a playwright about my age whose work many of you know. He is currently NED after not 1, but 2 bouts of Ewing sarcoma, a cancer that usually afflicts children. When I reached out to him after my diagnosis for some sort of solace, advice maybe, he said, among other things, bet on yourself. Why not? We are playwrights, or I should say we are writers. After all, we're accustomed to thinking perhaps my next play will be a hit, win a prize, move to Broadway, or at least move somebody deeply. But I'm realistic too. At least I hope I am. No evidence means simply no evidence now, which is of course all we always have. Physicists, philosophers, and my Hollywood psychic will tell you, I do have one, only now exists. Easy for them to say. We don't know what now is. William James defined it as the, quote, short duration of which we are immediately and incessantly sensible, end quote. I read somewhere that the present moment is 25 syllables long, a respectable sentence. Dramaturgically speaking, the now is probably what theater folk call a beat. A beat is a unit of action. One beat begins where the previous beat ends. This juncture is called change. Change is what keeps your audience awake. Change crackles, throws off light, smolders, fizzles, explodes. Change often produces a pause or even silence, but not always. When I was 6 years old on New Year's Eve approaching midnight, my father raised a glass of cheap champagne and bellowed, "Say goodbye to the 70s. I fell to pieces sobbing. He took pity on me. This is one of my only memories of him loving me, and whisked me upstairs to bed where he read The Sorcerer's Apprentice to me, just as the 80s slithered in. Like everybody, I presume, I have experienced a lifelong terror of time, its loss. This is why I'm sure I write plays. I can control at least my imagination of time's passage, and more importantly, what change it contains. I remember learning as if it were a Masonic secret that a page of script in so-called standard format works out to a minute of stage time. 90 pages runs 90 minutes. Infinite time and space bound in a nutshell, crammed within this wooden, highly flammable 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, as the Buddha might as well have said, oh, for a muse of fire. Because plays are temporal, fleeting. Usually they are disposable. As a student, I could be glib about it, pompous too. The theater's perishability was a major point in its favor, an almost religious characteristic that contrasted mightily with the tawdry mercantilism of film and television, even literature. Of course, film and video and paper will degrade in time too, but theater, like mass, is magic. You can buy a script, of course, but so few plays withstand the fire of their premieres. Play publishers make their money from licensing performances, not selling books, and scripts, everybody knows this, are painful to read, as, by design, they require too much of our imagination. Because an extraordinary play happens purely in the present, watching it and performing it is an experience of both joy and sorrow. And I don't mean simply those comic and tragic masks. I mean the joy I felt as a young actor, standing off stage waiting to step into the light. I'd been a shy child. For some reason, my family and friends thought otherwise. I was a good actor. I thrust myself onto the stage precisely because I was terrified to be there. Backstage with my nose pressed to the black masking, heart pounding, mouth parching, I'd whisper to myself, intoning, in incantation, "You're alive, you're alive, you're alive," till I heard my cue and made my entrance. If this feeling of pure presence is not joy, then I don't know what it is. As for tragedy, well, these moments have to end, and some plays and productions are bad, so that's a tragedy, or good but hard. And there is grief in the days and weeks after the closing performance, relief too, not unlike after a life. Plays are shaped out of the mystery of empathy. My joy as the playwright is their joy as the actors, is your joy in the audience. At least that's how things are meant to unfold. Other emotions too, but joy foremost in the awareness, however conscious, of our privilege to inhabit this present, to sit in this room, however grand, or in some dusty black box, doesn't matter, sharing our individual allotments of time with each other and the story that is being made to happen for us and before us. These are cliches, but useful. The actors are here with us, spitting and aching, sweating and straining, and sometimes transcending. The theater is a sacrifice. These tickets were expensive. The actors and the playwright are paid practically nothing. Paula Vogel has said that as she matured, she realized the primacy of economy and precision in her play's language and action. Our days are numbered, more so every day. And what a gift it is that an audience has given you hours of their lives and asked you to fill it with something meaningful. And not wasting time means for the playwright, not wasting time on the page. Waste all the time you want drafting and redrafting, but without shattering the illusion of reality. Everything happening in your play happens for the first and last time. There's an old backstage joke about old audiences that any given performance could be their last. So, again, make this count. And speaking of counting, they say each of us has a certain number of beats in our hearts. They say you'll enjoy more beats the more you use your heart. So give us, in the audience, more life. Give us a thrill, which of course means thrill yourself while writing first. You are your first and sometimes, sadly, only audience. That's interesting. I got the biggest laugh so far. I'm thinking as a playwright, I'm like, what beats can I cut? That's a good laugh. I'll save that for later. As for the young, well, a bad play, boring, cloying, cringy, might keep them from darkening a theater's door for the rest of their days. So, for art's sake, think of the children. My longtime but still quite youthful agent, Beth Blickers, she's not here to hear this wonderful compliment. That's her calling in, actually. Asked me recently, what will we do when the boomers are all gone? I think about this frequently. I share it with you ambivalently. How I've longed for audiences of my own generation who might more likely understand me or share my confusions at least. All playwrights know that Saturday night's standing ovation invariably precedes Sunday matinee's snoring chorus of hearing aid feedback. It's true. Oh, and sometimes that's Saturday night too. Oh, and be skeptical of the popular young playwrights. They are probably tap dancing past the old folks' homes. But if you are economical and precise in your use of porous dialogue, the escalating action of your very personal conflicts, your ever more revealing disclosures of character, the complexities of your thematic development, your audience will get neither ahead of you nor behind, neither their future, when is this thing over, nor their past, why did I say that at dinner? Like Samuel Beckett, like Carol Churchill, your plays should get shorter and shorter. Perhaps they will shorten over the course of your career, yes, but also each singular play will shrink, perhaps coalesce or cohere is better, from rough to finished draft. In truth, my plays tend to expand and contract over the course of hundreds of drafts, as if breathing organisms, until they set, if you will, locked for opening night or publication, if I'm lucky. When I was younger, I wrote plays that tried to include everything. I suppose this was a Shakespearean ambition, or like Thomas Wolfe, whose title I've nicked and tweaked from my use here of Time in the River. But there's a reason James Joyce only wrote one very bad play. As Pound said of his cantos, I picked out this and that thing that interested me and then jumbled them into a bag, but that's not the way to make a work of art. The more I write, the less I include. Only what feels most necessary, potent, dangerous, often what feels obvious, like, why didn't I think of that before? I ignore my notes and, frankly, most notes given by others, which is a dangerous thing to say at a writer's conference. Things that occur to me while I'm not writing will most likely be of no use to me while I am writing. My first finished draft 50, 60, is almost always a third too long, maybe longer. But day by day, beat by beat, I learn what should be left out. This has nothing to do with short attention spans. This is how a story happens. This is why unfavorable theater reviews in print or in conversation are hostile, if not abusive. We feel our time's been wasted because our time is, I say this passionately now, precious. This is why audiences riot in the theater. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but do readers really riot over novels and poems? Not as often, I'd wager. But if booing and affronted exiting can be considered riotous, then such behavior happens all the time in the theater. I saw Harold Pinter walk out of a Neil LaBute play. He found the volume of the music oppressive, is what I heard afterwards. And if I may humbly brag, I was told Alan Rickman slept through most of a play of mine. When you or a loved one are gravely ill, you can't help but feel that the now is undeniably, inescapably now. Nothing matters aside from doing everything you can to keep her alive. Right now, keep yourself alive. You can't help but take things one day at a time, as they say in recovery, as I suppose I am, as I hope I am, recovering, as we all are, says the pseudo-Catholic in me, one moment, one beat at a time. When one is gravely ill, anything can happen, and sometimes does. In a play, anything can and always does happen, must do. Every moment, a potential calamity. We've all seen an actor go up on her lines. A speaker loses place. Disaster. You can hear a pin drop. Also when people take very long drinks. What's going to happen next? You've seen that, right? When somebody really screws up on stage, it's often the most exciting moment in an otherwise mediocre production. Part 2, or section 2. Wake up, because you're probably feeling sleepy. Wake up. Writers are fond of advising, write as if you were dying, which of course we all are. It's an unsettling, even dangerous place to be, to live, to write. But many of you know already what I've been learning lately. The threat of death clarifies. And I mean clarify in the sense of removing impurities too, if distraction in life is considered impure. This all sounds well and good, but I'm here to confirm that it's hard to write this way. I mean, it's not exactly fun. It's joyful. It's sorrowful, often terrifying. What did Rilke say? Every angel is terrible. Nobody truly wants to write for an audience of the living when one is possibly not going to be around to watch it with them. Sure, there's freedom, but I want to hear your applause. I want to sit in the back row, the balcony, and watch my play work, that is, move you, wake you up to the present moment of my story, the way my story, as I wrote it, woke me up to the present moment of my life. Writers advise you to write this way, of course, with that skull upon your desk, because you may, in such a state, through such a frame of mind, write as if you are more awake, within reason. Human beings can only bear so much wakefulness, but let TV and podcasts serve as our sleep aids. My friend Paul Watson, a recently retired war reporter, has been telling me for years now some version of how, quote, it bugs me to the core that people don't notice how quickly we die. Whether we're driving home from work or suntanning on a beach in Phuket and this wave comes in and just keeps on coming. Or, this is true, a friend of mine was honeymooning. It was the day after their wedding. A spider crawls onto the groom's shoulder and he swerves minutely into an oncoming bus. The bride somehow survived. So if one must write while awake to life, to death, does that mean that one must write in terror? Of course. For most of us, our mood disorders have taken care of most of that. Our terror in the moment, in our skins. Maybe I'm just speaking for the anxious mood disorders there. But of course, your characters should be terrified too. They should be fearing for their lives, albeit perhaps just their psychic lives. I'm paraphrasing, but Chekhov said, I want to write plays where people are sharing a dignified meal and one person's life is coming together while another's life is falling apart. The graceful adventure of conversation is how Borges, admittedly not a playwright, put it. Right towards danger, Romulus Linney would often advise, often from this podium, and once in an epic thunderstorm. Before I knew Romulus, I heard him lecture at the Sewanee Playwrights Conference on the idea of revising oneself before one can properly revise one's play, using Chekhov's revision of the Wood Demon into Uncle Vanya as his representative case. I'm perhaps veering off course, but this reminds me of Allen Ginsberg's advice to a friend of mine many years ago. You have to go through hell once or twice more. And you will. Because lately I've written mainly dramas and documentary and memoir plays, I may sound as if I'm shilling for more of the same, but comedy must be dangerous too. I have this on authority from my professionally funny wife. The danger of satirizing the powerful, the comedy of assailing taboos, but there's comedy and honesty too, and telling the truth about our vulnerabilities and fears and shames. The playwright Joe Orton was rehearsing the premiere of his seminal farce Loot, in which the titular stolen goods are stuffed inside a casket that ought to contain a character's dead mother. The dead mother has been stashed in a cupboard instead. Hijinks ensue, her body's tossed about on stage, undressed, done up in a dressmaker's dummy. At some point, her glass eye pops loose and rolls around a lot. If I remember correctly, in and out of hands and maybe even a mouth. But the play wasn't working in rehearsal, it just wasn't funny. So Orton brought in his own dead mother's dentures, asked a particularly problematic cast member to hold out his hand and place the well-worn prosthetic teeth in the actor's open palm. These are my dead mother's teeth, the playwright told the actor, who reacted with some queasy mixture of revulsion and shame and anger. That's what's missing from your performance, Orton said. And by all accounts, the play got funnier. I wanted to wake up for a long time. Many of my plays began with this imperative, figuratively and at least once literally. Wake up. It's a cinematic mainstay, the bedside alarm. Our protagonist wakes to the day, and the story that we expect will change his or her life. But this urge to see and say things as they are was counterbalanced by my fear of life, by the clutter of anxiety and ego and repression. I simultaneously hid and revealed myself in my plays. I gravitated towards historical epics. The casts were large, the ideas larger, the props, I'm serious, were out of control. I was camouflaging myself in clutter. I was drawn to ghost stories for the ready metaphor of child abuse, or so I discovered with time and therapy, but also because I was only a ghost in my own plays. I used to think that all good plays were haunted, or hauntings to be precise. When I was new to New York, I wanted to start a theater company called the Dead Theater. Partly this was a joke, like, okay, yes, the theater's dead, it's always dead, and we're a theater and we're here, but also, well then let's do what the dead do well, which is haunt, which is step out of the wings of the past, out of the personal and the cultural unconscious, and remind ourselves and our audiences of something unsettling and unsettled that needs to be put right. So I liked forgotten stories or unknowable stories alluding to almost unspeakable truths. But I was still hiding. I was creatively somnambulistic. Remember, I am you. The playwright is the audience. By trying to wake you up, I was trying to wake myself up. Like everybody here, I've woken up many times, of course, incrementally. It's a dramaturgical fantasy that lives change profoundly in an instant or even a day. Trauma reverberates backwards and forwards in time. When I was 12 and I witnessed my brother throw himself out the window of our attic. When I left my agoraphobic family for Ireland with only an overstuffed pack on my back. When I was disowned by my family more than a decade ago for reasons I suspect I'll never understand. When Jessica texted me, I was in the middle of auditions in Manhattan and she was in LA, quote, it is cancer, her cancer. When 6 months later I woke out of twilight sedation and the gastroenterologist said he couldn't even get the camera in there the tumor was so large. In all these cases, the thought occurred to me simultaneously with the panic and dread that I was receiving a gift, if only I could survive it. In all these cases, I would discover I wasn't who I was anymore. I would have to figure out who I was now. And the trauma of good news, too. But who wants to hear about that? And each time I woke up, I wrote better. Some of it too raw to be pleasing, but with a little distance, I found I was writing with more power. This isn't just boasting. I can't claim that anybody else felt the same way if they were paying attention at all. My new power, my authority, was something I felt in the moments of writing. What Barry Hannah called, I think, somebody can correct me, the party at the typewriter, which is all we have anyway as writers, the rest being not our business, that is, being business. Lately, I've wanted to write plays simply between you and me, happening now, in this room, sometimes in a fictional setting to a degree, sometimes with two actors playing other characters, but always essentially two people in one place, two in one, a one place that is changeable, vertiginous even, with an audience of however many might show up, no sets or not much, no props if it can be managed, no miming, please, lights and sound still belong as storytelling markers, but also for their suggestive, even associative powers. We are theatrically inside my head, after all. Why pretend otherwise? A head in the midst of waking up. And it's trauma, of course, that wakes us up. Catastrophe, private and public, divorces and earthquakes and elections, forces that force change or create the will for change for a time. As in war, I suspect so the sick room. Senses sharpen, heighten, sharp reliefs, every leaf on a tree, it has been said. In my case, it was often smell, like a superpower, a symptom of pregnancy. I was almost canine for a while. It was hard to bear, and it's only slightly abated. My new play is remarkably smelly. During trauma, everything seems to mean something. Perhaps it does. Signs and symbols crop up everywhere. You've noticed them before because you're a writer, but now you can knit them together with an alacrity that makes you question your sanity. You take comfort in the inchoate, highly personal meaning of passing pest control and or plumbing trucks, the numbers 13 and 14, spiders as metaphor for chemo. Let them crawl through the house of your body and do their work. Yes, as Viktor Frankl noted while surviving Auschwitz, even birds can mean a lot. So you pray for angels. You even meet some. The male nurse who caught you as you fell the first morning you tried to walk after surgery. The nurse who embraced you as you cried and told you that her daughter was born in 1973 just like you. She has a rare cancer and, quote, she's still here. These are moments that meant something, must mean something. Of course, in the midst of trauma, the past can seep in. Let it. Your life will flash before your eyes, but in slow motion, really, over weeks and months, a year. You may even succumb to writing memoir before the tide recedes, before you've recovered or run out of time. This summer is also that summer. Yesterday is today. I sat on that bench in Cork City scribbling poems in my notebook, just as I sit on this bench in Kenmare scribbling this portion of this draft of this lecture. I'm revising this now on the grassy verge where I took some of my wedding photos almost 11 years ago to the day. I remember Breadloaf 1994 too easily. One-on-one, a novelist who'd read my story suggested I write plays instead. Why did I believe him? Did I believe him? My best friend's mother, whom I loved more than my mother, was dying back home in her living room of a recurrence of breast cancer. The week before, she had beckoned me to bend and kiss her, and when I did, she asked if I would become a poet, and I said I already was. I was going to Breadloaf after all. And now I find myself standing up here in the position I've assumed many times over the years, although not here, of lecturing, inspiring, depressing, instructing you. Perhaps I've disappointed you already. I have more rules, dogma, principles, surely. Telling you how you should write your plays feels a lot like telling you how you should live your life. I'll do it, but I don't really like it. As for rules, dogma, principles, May I suggest where I found mine? Joseph Campbell, Jesus. Lajos Edgry's The Art of Dramatic Writing. The Upright Citizens Brigade Comedy Improvisation Manual. Annie Lamott's Bird by Bird for emotional support. Robert McKee's Story for the rueful chuckles. But all trauma ends somehow. You know you're feeling better when some of the nurses seem attractive to you. People have been there before. When you begin to feel a bit like a Benny Hill sketch. When you write. You're relatively healthy on your own 2 feet when you find yourself envying other writers again, a bit. You will feel let down. You will worry that your writing is no good. Hello, old friend. You will desire accolades and applause. You will desire. You desire because you are healthy. You are happy. You are astonished. Yet now you want to need to know, what has it all been for? Part 3, and this is the last part. Conclusions. You have seen behind the curtain, they say. They seem to like to say. A platitude, but I like it for its theatrical implications. We have seen the ropes and pulleys, the backs of scenery flats, the stagehand surprised amidst sawdust and loose screws and rat droppings. We've seen something of how it all works, this performance of living. Maybe they're talking about an afterlife, but I didn't see too much of that. My friend Roberto Flores said to me behind the curtain, he almost died a decade ago from hepatitis C and liver cancer, but at the last moment, a family friend's death and organ donation rescued him. The donor was a strapping teen, and Beto was small. His new liver juts proudly from his side. My friend Paul Watson, the war reporter, when I told him of my diagnosis, quote, "Writer, write thyself," he wrote in an email. "No doubt you'll see things only you can tell with your words." The idea is common. Almost dying should make us wiser. Kinder, at least. A deep distress hath humanized my heart, right? Well, I don't know about that, but we have all seen behind the curtain in one way or another at various points in our lives. We should tell the world what we've seen, what we've learned. I've changed, though like all change, I know it's temporary. My bladder's smaller. My liver's grown back. Parts of us regenerate, others don't. My hands and feet are still numb from neuropathy from the chemo, but they've been waking up. I've been told it could take a year. Some feeling never returns. I've learned to be less careful. I was a dedicated hand washer for years, and look where that got me. As a writer, I was a perfectionist, or at least I thought I was, an aesthetic hand washer, if you will. But I am less so, much less so now. Perfection is seductive, but messes often have more life in them. Overall, I'm less scared. I'm terrified, but I'm less scared. Of opening nights, for example. Still, I don't want to see the performance, or worse yet, chat with you at the after party. It's no insult to you or my collaborators, but my work, as they say, is done by that point. I'm less scared to give readings or lectures. I don't need to drink before or after. I'm less scared to meet you. The awkward things said and unsaid, yours and mine. I just let it fly, let it lie. Doesn't bother me much. I'm less scared of rejection. I mean, who cares? I want to eat, sure. I want a job, respect. I want to feel artistically, what's that awful word, fulfilled. But I almost died. I could be about to die again. What does it matter if somebody I don't know doesn't care for whatever reason for what I've written? Well, rejection still stings a little. But less so now, less. I'm grateful more often, bewildered all the time. It's too early to feel guilty. I distinguish less between what I live and what I write. I cry more. I often look forward to it, though I don't let my daughter see. My daughter squealing with delight, sandpipers, sandpipers, along the beach in Caher Daniel on a misty late June morning, with her mother a few steps behind when 2 years ago I thought she would die, when I know she will, one day, as I will, but maybe now we will have longer together than we thought. With my lower back seized from driving the perilously twisting lanes of County Kerry, I lie in a bed of rock above the cove, just as I lied in countless gurneys over the last 18 months, wheeled into operating rooms and scanning tubes. I now allow others to care for me sometimes. I've learned that I feel annoyed to be called brave as an artist and as a survivor. I've learned that I don't like the word survivor, battle, stricken. Cancer is not a beast or a monster. Likewise, the alt-right or what have you is not a cancer. My wife feels the same, having been public lately about her cancer and treatment and basing a season of her TV show, very funny TV show, Playing House on the USA Network, Fridays at 11. She doesn't like it either. Maybe we're modest. Maybe we're in denial. Maybe we're annoyed because, of course, we've had no choice. The choice is whether or not to give in, but we've been given hope by our doctors and we have a daughter. Maybe we just don't want you to feel sorry for us. We don't want we don't want your commiserating frown smiles. See, I lost my place and that was exciting, right? The frown smiles. We don't want the imagined distance between us reinforced. When some people say we have been brave, what they really mean is we have been brave to talk about it, cancer. Or in my previous plays, writing about war or about the mental illness and abuse in my family. How brave, they often said, sometimes adding, I couldn't do what you do. I wouldn't reveal what you choose to reveal. Well, far be it from me to judge your suffering and what you choose to do with it. I often wish I'd kept my mouth shut about many things. A therapist once told me I have trouble distinguishing secrecy from privacy, and she's absolutely right. But weakness is a taboo, and one I believe every playwright must profane for ourselves and for our characters. This is unnatural. We human beings fear that in our weakened state we will be exploited, seized, and pounced upon. When one is ill, one feels a kind of primal embarrassment. Surely one has done something to cause, I want to say deserve, this vulnerability. In the many months of my treatment, I often felt frightened as I hobbled along the TV-ready lanes of uptown Santa Monica. It would have been easy to be mugged, to be murdered. I felt I could have been blown over by an ill-timed puff of wind. But I've always believed it was my calling, as pretentious as that sounds, to try to tell the truth about that which is most difficult to be truthful about. To tell others as artfully as possible about the burden I carry in my life, in my moments, such as they are. And you will, I hope, return the favor and will learn from each other, at least feel less alone. Because what else are we doing here? We are running out of time. Running, notice, not walking, plays and lectures should sprint through their conclusions. But wait, that's it? Time too often moves slowly when we're young, when we're bored, waiting. Time flies as we age, Acts 3, 4, 5. Time ceases to exist when you're having fun. And by fun, I mean apprehension, fear, terror, wonder. You've heard it said of Shakespeare that his tragedies are done when everybody's dead, his comedies when everybody's wed. The wedding is a kind of death, of course, as it starts the story of a new life together. And there are survivors on stage at the end of Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, etc., to try and make sense, even verse, out of what we've witnessed and survived. Dramaturgs will say simply that one has reached the end when the problem of the play has been solved, when the protagonist's conflict has been resolved, perfectly or not. There's nothing left that has to happen. Our time out of time has run out, and we'll return to ourselves, our changing bodies, the ever-revising narratives of our lives. Sequels and cycles of plays aside, the ending that seems to begin a new play feels profound to me. We know the now continues elsewhere, perhaps not with these characters, not with us watching, but the story, the true story, that is always happening now, that's truly never ending. So take heart. Another play will make you laugh like this one, cry like that. Many more will bore, disgust, and if you're lucky, enrage you. The best, that is the most truthful play, will do all these things and more over the rollicking course of its limited engagement. What's the old joke about never dipping your toe in the same river twice? The river's always changing, but of course so are we. It's a luxury to stand beside the river as if we are not in it. The young, the healthy revel in this illusion. The afflicted characters and their stories rush by. The playwright luxuriates this way too, recuperates even, sitting upon the shore as he writes, as does the audience in the moments they are compelled within the spell of the play. We are all in that river, of course. Of course, we are essentially the water. Maybe this has been not so much a lecture as a description of where I have been living, between the graveyard and the river. As I have literally lived for a week while drafting these pages in Kenmare on an estuary on the southwestern coast of Ireland, the River Sheen to one side, Thames River, and the famine yard just uphill. Through one living room window I see mossy Celtic crosses, one crowned with a full bottle of whiskey. A few years back I would have found my location disconcerting. Now it is the skull upon my desk, because I know now that this is life. Out the window on the other side of the living room, my daughter runs in the grass above the glad, glimmering sheen. Thank you for your time.